This interview is brought to you by OKCoin Crypto Exchange, where you can buy, sell, and trade your favorite cryptocurrencies, and you don't have to pay high fees. OKCoin charges low fees, the lowest in the industry. You can also stake your crypto and keep 100% of the rewards. OKCoin does not charge any fees when it comes to staking. In fact, it is the only exchange where you can buy, sell, and trade Miami coin and also stake Miami coin at a high APY, currently at 280%. OKCoin also has a great referral program that if you refer a friend, you guys can split $100 in Bitcoin. So be sure to sign up with OKCoin, link in the description. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Thinking Crypto channel, your home for crypto news and interviews. With me today is Charles Hoskinson, who's one of the great minds in the cryptocurrency space, the founder of Cardano and the co-founder of Ethereum. Charles, great to have you on the show.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Charles, I've wanted to speak to you for a very long time. I'm a fan of Cardano. I'm an ADA token holder. So I have lots of questions for you, some from the community as well. But maybe we can quickly start with your background. Where are you from? Where did you grow up?
Well, I grew up originally in Hawaii, of all places. You know, I'm actually technically native Hawaiian, so mahalo, everyone. I was born on the island of Maui, but I moved when I was 9 to Colorado, and I kind of grew up in Colorado in a slightly remote area, just outside of the Front Range. And little by little, Colorado changed, and so I decided to go and explore and see the world. And so I've been to now 78 countries. Originally, I was going to be a doctor because my dad and brother are doctors, my uncle's a doctor, grandfather's a doctor, but I just don't like people. And so I said, I need to do something else. And I said, well, you know, mathematics looks really interesting. So I rode that train for a little while, first at Metro State and then later at CU Boulder. And then, you know, I say, yeah, maybe a PhD in math is not for me. And so I said, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. And it's like, well, but I didn't know anybody. I didn't have any business skills. So I said, all right, those who cannot do, teach. And so I went ahead and created a free online class called Bitcoin, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love Crypto. And I got about 70,000 students with that course. And then because of that, it kind of opened up the entire cryptocurrency space. And one of my students was a venture capitalist, and he gave me a little bit of funding to start my first company in the space, Invictus Innovations. And from there, I went to Ethereum. And then from Ethereum, I started Input Output. And I've been running IOHK since February of 2015. And we've grown from 2 people to 600 people. We're in 52 countries. We got 120 plus papers we've written, 1 million lines of code. Everybody knows us from Cardano, but we've also done nation state deals like Atala Prism integration in Ethiopia. We're working with Dish, you know, Fortune 250 company with Boost Mobile. So it's been a pretty wild ride to do 3 different things and to do lots of really cool, interesting research and meet people all around the space.
Wow. You are certainly one of the godfathers of the cryptocurrency space. You've seen so many things. You've been here a very long time. But I had a quick question because I've seen you post photos of you on a farm, and I'm assuming it's in Colorado. Can you tell us a bit about that farm and, you know, what's going on over there?
Yeah, so I have a farm and a ranch. And so the farm is in Colorado, grow hay there. And all the animals are miniature animals. So I have miniature donkeys and miniature goats and miniature cows and so forth, because it's about right for 50 acres. You can go smaller on the animals if you can't go bigger on the land. And it's just got this beautiful view of the Front Range and, you know, Longs Peak and all these other places. And then I have a ranch that's a proper ranch up in Wyoming. It's outside of Wheatland, and it's about 11,000 acres, and it's got 500 bison on it. So I ranch bison up there, and that's a lot more wild. We got mountain lions, bears, and elk, and all kinds of things roaming around. And I had all this year was building up the infrastructure on the ranch because I got there was no internet, and I was like, oh, that just can't work. And so I actually had to blast a road up the mountainside and put a microwave tower up. And so I got to play with dynamite, but I got fiber optic and microwave in, and now I'm running gigabit internet on the ranch, and, you know, improving all the roads, and, you know, I erected a bunch of structures and other things, but kept all the natural beauty there for it. So it's been a, you know, kind of a work of passion. as I go out and fight the wars in the crypto space, it's been nice to actually have a farm and a ranch to be able to spend the majority of my time at.
So a fun question I want to ask along those lines. If you were to create your own metaverse, would it be nature filled? Would it be kind of a copy of your ranch or your farm, or would it be something else?
Yeah, so metaverses are really interesting. I read this book recently called The Spatial Web, and I'm almost done with it. I'm about halfway through, give or take. But basically, there's this idea of what is Web 3.0. And so the original internet, we just had these static websites and they have databases on the back end, and we'd interact with them from desktop computers with a web browser. And then the next generation web, Web 2.0, that was really social media plus mobile computing. So suddenly you have Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and these dynamic web experiences, but they're stateless and they're context free. So they're stateful within a domain, but the things you do on Facebook don't necessarily port over to Google. They don't port over to Amazon. They're still siloed in that respect. And there's this big predatory data economy that's coming. So for a long time, people are saying, well, what is Web 3.0 going to look like? And that's called the semantic web. And so the canonical way of explaining that is if you go to a website, let's say on gardening, and you notice that they keep mentioning greenhouse in that gardening website, artificial intelligence should have enough context from the surrounding material as it parses it to understand that you're talking about a glass structure, with light shining in and plants growing in it. If you're on a website talking about painting houses and different colors to pick for painting houses, same word greenhouse, it'll understand it's actually talking about a structure painted green. Okay, so that's context, and web is not so good at that. So for a long time, people have been chasing the semantic web. So at the base layer of the web, it's starting to move in that direction. But then what's happened is our interfaces are changing on us. We now have Oculus Rift and HTC Vive and all these things, and Apple is working very heavily on AR. There's probably going to be Apple glasses around 2025, give or take. When that happens, Samsung will create their own version, and the AR mixed reality VR revolution is coming. So we have all these advancements in AI and semantics. We have all these advancements in interfaces. And what that means is Web3 is not just a thin layer, but it's also a vertical where you actually have this metaverse that lives above it. And suddenly you can either overlay onto the physical world digital attributes. Like when you look at a building, like a restaurant, it shows you on your AR glasses, what time does it open? What time does it close? The Yelp customer reviews, these types of things. Or you can go completely into the digital world and actually have a virtual reality experience. So where the cryptocurrency space comes into play is you need kind of a control layer for the logic of these things and a database for these types of things to enforce scarcity, uniqueness. So that's where NFTs come into play, these types of things. So there's been a lot of conversations about how do you build a metaverse spatial web that actually has uniqueness and scarcity data, privacy protections, and also is not necessarily owned by a company like Facebook. So your question is, well, what would I do with this metaverse, this capability? I think there's an enormous pedagogical advantage to this, in that there's all these concepts like four-dimensional spaces or non-Euclidean geometry or these types of things. And unfortunately, those are right now just living in the minds of physicists and mathematicians and sometimes computer scientists. They're not really accessible to everyday people. But then every now and then a video game comes out like a Hyperbolica or, for example, Portal. And then suddenly you're starting to think a little bit outside of the box about space and time and these things. Well, when you have metaverse, you actually can experience hyperdimensional spaces. You can actually experience time differently, these types of things. So I think that would be a really cool experiment to kind of explore and build. But in general, I'm actually very interested in the spatial web. I'm very interested in introducing identity and uniqueness to the spatial web. And I'm very interested in the data privacy components of it too. Because by the way, the IoT revolution is also connected to this because every surface is becoming machine understandable. Not too far in the future, you're going to have sensors in paint. And when you paint it on a surface, if you put your phone on it, your phone can talk to the paint. That's just something that'll be there. So you'll be at a restaurant or something like that. And what'll happen is you'll have your AR glasses on. You'll put your phone on the table. It'll power the table. And then suddenly your AR glasses show you a three-dimensional representation of the menu. And you can interact with a holographic menu in front of you. That's like 2030. It's not 2050, 2060, 2070, and so forth. Well, if you have cryptocurrencies, you could have an advertising token. You can have, all kinds of things where if you agree to share some demographic information with the restaurant, the menu gets discounted 10% or 20% or something like that. So that's how all these connecting tissues kind of come together. If you own your own data, your own identity, you have a DID or something like that that's associated with you, a decentralized identifier, then you can share all kinds of things. Like when you go to get ID'd, normally when you go to the bar, they say, hey, are you 21 or older? If you're in the United States, other countries, it's lower. Well, what if you have that portfolio and it's signed by your government? Then when you go in, when you order alcohol, a little prompt will come out of three-dimensional space. Do you want to share your age data with the vendor? Yes, click. And then they know you're good. The waitress will have AR glasses on. You go from red to green for alcohol, and just this kind of stuff is going to happen. So metaverses are really cool. They're a real thing. It's not a gimmick. And it's, you need crypto to basically put a trust model into it and scarcity model into it as you kind of physicalize the digital and digitalize the physical. And it's going to become, in the next 5-10 years, I think, a humongous product category for cryptocurrencies.
So before I get to, what role would Cardano play in that, I would love if you can give a quick overview of Cardano for those who are new, who may not know as much details. Why did you decide to start Cardano? What makes it different from other proof of stake blockchains?
Yeah, so the easiest way of understanding Cardano, and I say this so many times, so forgive the redundancy for those who've heard it before, but I think in generations. So Bitcoin was really an artifact of the 1980s and 1990s. So you had this cypherpunk movement, and they were inspired by Cryptonomicon, and they were inspired by the Whole Earth Catalog, and all of these really brilliant people who were like open source ethos, free information, open society. What does the world look like when you can move thought at the speed of light? Wow. And what happened is all that got aggregated together and it became Bitcoin, the money of the internet. And it was a really cool experiment. And it was kind of a victim of its own success. So for a long time, Bitcoins were worthless. No one cared about them. I remember back in the old days, we used to trade them on spreadsheets over forums. We'd use PayPal against the end user license agreement. We'd do all kinds of crazy shit 10 years ago. It was a lot of fun. But then all of a sudden, 2013, Bitcoin became valuable. It went from kind of a novelty to $1 billion market cap. And at that time, it was huge, $100 Bitcoin. Wow. Because remember, just a few years earlier, it's like they were worth less than $1. 100x in just a few years is just a crazy thing. You don't get that from any normal asset category. Gold doesn't go from $1,000 a troy ounce to $100,000 a troy ounce unless there's hyperinflation or something. So when it got serious, people started asking serious questions about use and utility, and thus began the second generation. The first generation was Bitcoin. The second generation was with Ethereum. And there it was like, how do we program stuff? Bitcoin is blind, deaf, and dumb. You can only push Bitcoin to people. Now that Taproot's come, it's finally got some programmability, but for the longest time, Bitcoin didn't have any programmability. And we want to do things like NFTs and smart contracts and ICOs and STOs and DeFi and all these other categories. You can't do any of that unless you have some degree of programmability. The analogy to think about is in the early days of the internet, you had static websites. So they could be very pretty and have nice pictures and GIFs and these types of things. But when JavaScript came, then you get YouTube and Facebook and Amazon and these two-way Web 2.0 experiences. Okay, well, the same thing we did with Ethereum. We introduced the concept of smart contract, and then suddenly you have programmability. Suddenly you get this big revolution. There are three problems, though, in different directions. One is that system is still replicated, so it doesn't scale. So as a consequence, you become a victim of your own success. The transaction fees get very high. The resource gets more and more scarce. And the system kind of reaches a carrying capacity. And it never really grew to billions of users. Two, that system is still not really as interoperable as it needs to be with other blockchains and also the legacy financial infrastructure. And that's kind of the bedrock of finance. Finance is not really that fun if your money can only stay at your bank and you can never do a wire transfer and you can never spend outside of one store. You have a credit card, you can spend it anywhere. You have money in your PayPal account, you can send it to people, these types of things. Okay, so you need interoperability. You need the Wi-Fi moment of the industry. And
Right.
three, there's this meta problem of governance, the who pays and who decides. If these protocols are going to be useful for billions of people and be around for a really long period of time, you're going to need to have some system to decide how to change things, not just today, but 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now. And we're not so good at this when we talk about products that don't belong to people. When you think about the iPhone, you say, oh, Apple's going to change it and they'll update it. When you think about Windows, you say Microsoft's going to change it. But what is an open source decentralized protocol? Who's accountable for that? Where does the innovation come from? Who's going to build that? How do you manage and govern that stuff? So those are three unique problems in addition to what makes a great smart contract, in addition to what makes a decentralized money and payment system and so forth. So you need to do all the stuff the prior generations. You still need to be good at doing Ethereum-like stuff and good at doing Bitcoin stuff. But then you need to also solve those three problems. And the reality is that requires completely new protocols in order to accomplish that. So what we did in 2015 is we said, all right, we don't know how to do it. We're going to have an empty mind, a beginner's mind, and we're just going to do first principles, peer-reviewed academic research. So we're going to write all of these foundational papers, one after another. And each paper, as we build on top of those papers, is going to build out this body of science, this corpus of science. And it'll give us a really good idea of how solvable actually are these problems. Can you solve them with this big decentralized replicated system, or do you need centralization in certain places? And if they are solvable, what is the optimal solution? And how many people can these systems be useful for? So at the base levels, how do you create a root of trust? What's your consensus system? And this was the old proof of work versus proof of stake debate. Well, in 2015, there was no real rigorous academic work for proof of stake. And it wasn't clear if proof of stake actually worked or not. If you went and talked to a Bitcoin core developer, they would say things like, it's fantasy, it's perpetual motion. Proof of stake's a scam. It can't work. There's no resource there. There's no scarcity there, these types of things. And then you talk to the open source developers like the NXT people. Oh, we've solved everything. There's no problems. Proof of stake works. You're all idiots if you don't believe that. So there was like this weird dialogue that was not productive. So we wrote the Ouroboros paper and we proved that proof of stake can work. And then we spent 6 years refining the model, iterating the model, and making it more secure and making it more useful and so forth. And all these papers got peer reviewed at major conferences. I mentioned we read over 120 of them, 10,000 citations in the portfolio. It's pretty amazing when you actually look at that legacy there. And what that gave us a good sense of is, how do you build the right engine, the right root of trust for a system that can grow and scale organically over the time to millions to billions of users? So we have a collection of solutions in the scalability bucket, a collection of solutions in the interoperability bucket, a collection of solutions in the governance bucket. On interoperability with things like NEPA PALs and our sidechains protocol. On the governance side, we have things, for example, like Catalyst, which manages a fund of $1.4 billion to basically, that's community controlled. So if you hold ADA, you're in control of it, to use to bootstrap and grow the ecosystem. And a whole government's being built on top of that with a constitution and all these other things that decide basically how to manage this open infrastructure that now 2 million people belong to. So what really differentiates Cardano is this kind of balanced approach between engineering and academia, this community-driven approach, and this commitment to permanent infrastructure. We don't want to do it in a way where everything has to be thrown away in 3 years. And you have to start over, kind of like with Ethereum. They released it, and then now F2 is the next big thing. It's always when F2, when F2, when F2. So they're admitting that they can't solve the third generation problems. We want to build something that organically grows over time, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, to become something special. And then the philosophical question is, well, who is this most useful for? I entered the cryptocurrency space, not just out of academic curiosity, but I entered in because I was I really believe that this technology can solve the problems of the developing world. There, they don't have economic identity. They don't have access to banking. There, they have predatory lending, predatory insurance, predatory remittances. There's not a lot of rule of law to protect property rights. Land gets stolen all the time. Civil wars break out all the time. And the problem is, you can't just sit back and say, please be better, government, because if they were going to be better, they had already done it.
Yeah.
Okay. So you need a different system to actually do that. And cryptocurrencies are a great third option. between just entrusting some strong man or trying to install a democracy. It's something that puts power back in the hands of people. So you could be your own bank, you can control your own identity, and you can take your value with you, especially as we go to a more digital economy. So in addition to building this project out, we started a very aggressive commercial outreach where we went to Africa and set up an office in Ethiopia. And we've been all around the continent. I just got back from Africa. I was in 6 countries. South Africa, Zanzibar, Burundi, Ethiopia, Kenya, Egypt. We went to Ethiopia during a bloody civil war. You know, the rebels were 80 miles away from the capital when we left. We're real committed to this, and we've created a movement of millions of people across the continent of Africa. And we have a lot of growth in Mongolia, a lot of growth in South America, a lot of growth in the Caribbean. And it's helping some of the poorest people in the world actually be able to get identity. So our view is not only is this infrastructure great for everybody, but it's especially great for the bottom 3 billion who don't yet have economic identity, and it can create a very fair system for them. So we have a very long arc view. We have a very peer-reviewed view that gives us a decentralized brain. We're very community-oriented. And then also we have a mission to bank the unbanked and connect the unconnected, get people in the system.
I wanted to ask about, I'll segue straight to that, your visit to Africa. So with the different countries that you're working with in Africa, maybe you can go a bit more in depth in the use cases. I think you touched on some of that, which is helping to bank the unbanked. Are there other use cases? Maybe it's diplomas or IDs or different things. Can you go into those specific use cases that you're targeting?
Yeah, all of the above. For example, when we were in South Africa, we talked to ShopRite. We met with their innovation division, their CEO. And one of the things we're trying to figure out is, ShopRite knows more about the people of South Africa than the South African government does. They have so much raw data from their commercial activities. They actually started correlating it. Like, for example, they found weird patterns. If you buy lots of religious artifacts, you're actually 2.5 times more likely to default on a loan. Wow, go figure. But that's something they just know. So they even started a company to monetize that called Rainmaker. And then the ads are 19 times more effective at micro-targeting than Facebook ads. So it just gives you an example of the power of the data economy. Well, that economy is mostly fragmented and untapped, and a BAT-style solution would be phenomenal in that kind of a setting. Especially if you can share some of the revenue with the consumers, because their consumers are some of the poorest people on the planet, and they're very price sensitive. So anything that can help reduce that's great. That's an example of just a made in heaven commercial arrangement where we can help them solve a lot of the remittance and currency risk problems. We can help them monetize data in ways that are good for their customers and respect people's privacy. And we can innovate a lot of things for the Walmart of Africa, ShopRite. And then you look at Zanzibar, they have the blue economy there. That's 60% of their GDP is related to the ocean, seaweed manufacturing, fish, these types of things. And they have this huge problem where most of the fishing occurs within 5 miles of the shoreline because they don't have engines on their boats. Okay, if they don't have ice boxes and engines on their boat, they lose 25% of their catch, and they overfish the spawning areas. So over time, they're destroying the ecology of their fishing. So they're burning out the primary resource of Zanzibar. One of our partners, World Mobile, is there, and they're actually building an ISP. And they're getting the entire country connected, all 1.8 million people, starting in Stony Town. And they put up 2 towers, one at a school and one in a fish market. And they're gradually building things out. And they're even going to experiment with something like what Project Loon was doing with Google, to do broadcast over balloons so that they can cover out deep into the oceans. And so you can do an all of the above solution for the blue economy. You can provide financing to mechanize the boats and get ice boxes. So you get much further out. You can get larger yields, and your yields don't spoil. And these are very profitable microloans to SMEs to get the boats and the other things there. And they massively improve the GDP of Zanzibar. But at the same time, you also can have internet connectivity in these boats. So what does that mean? It means that you can now put anti-poaching and anti-illegal fishing mechanisms in a sentinel system. If a fisherman sees somebody actually, in an area they're not supposed to be, and they report them, they can get a token or a credit from the government for that. So you can protect the coastal lines. And then you talk about supply chain. I need to know that my fish is safe. I need to know it was properly refrigerated. I need to know it was properly treated. Blockchains are great at supply chains and these types of things. So we talked about all that in Zanzibar. Then we went to Burundi, and only 11% of the country there is electrified. So 9 out of 10 people don't have power. 2.5% have internet connectivity. So the very same stuff that could solve Zanzibar's connectivity program could actually solve the connectivity issues of Burundi. But here's the really cool thing. You can build micro ISPs. And so instead of having 4 big oligarchical companies that are monopolistic and competing with each other, you can build community-owned companies that are the bottom up. And as people use the towers, they actually start owning part of the tower. Isn't that a novel concept that if you use the same Wi-Fi router again and again and again, you pay to access it, you start actually buying fractional ownership in it? Crypto does this. You can do these things super easy, super trivial. The same thing about fractionalized ownership of an NFT, fractionalized ownership of a microwave tower or fiber optic infrastructure and so forth. And so suddenly you have community ownership of your ISP. So as they go from 2.6% connectivity to 100% connectivity, they could be one of the first countries in the world where the majority of the internet's owned by the people, not by a few foreign companies that come on it. The same for electrification. There's all kinds of real cool things that you can do to build ecologically sustainable, cooperative, community-owned alternative energy to electrify the country that's rural in nature and token-based. So we met with the president of Burundi, and we had some great conversations about that, the census, the digital ID system. The World Bank is going to be giving Burundi about $60 million to work on digital identity and the census. And we do a digital identity, and all those identities can be anchored on top of Cardano. So that means they're immutable, they're time-stamped, they're auditable, they're all there. That's 12 million people there. And as they get economic identity, that means they're going to consume DeFi through that portal. Then we went to Ethiopia. There, we're doing a lot of education work for academic credentials because there's a big problem with credential fraud and inflation and credential portability. It's real hard when your country's in a civil war to say, hey, university, can you go ahead and mail my transcripts to this European university? Yeah, we'll get back to you. Yeah, it might take 6 months to a year. Meanwhile, you can't get into your PhD program. You can't get in your MBA program. You can't go to medical school. You can't go to law school. You can't get a job because you can't verify your employer credentials. You have a digital credential you control that's signed by the university. You can self-verify to the employer the claims and circumstances you make. And that's what we're building in Ethiopia. Then we go over to Kenya. We have great partners there in microfinance institutions. We have one that's called Possessia. And Hilda, she's a great woman. She turned out a job at Google to start a company in Kenya, and she's running this amazing microfinance shop. And there we're talking about blockchain-based reputation and identity systems, specifically for microfinance loans with low NPLs. Those are non-performing loan rates. The system she has, the NPL rate is 20 times less than her competitors. On average, 40% of her competitors' loans default, 2% of her loans default. And that means she can give a much lower interest rate. Their interest rates can be as high as over 100% per year. Hers are about 3% per month for SMEs. So we can work with them to not only build a better metric, but also create liquidity and allow her to give more loans to people. And ADA holders can lend out to those people through her platform at some point and get 36% per year, and also help some of the poorest people in the world get loans that are 3 times cheaper than their alternatives inside the marketplace. Then you go up to Egypt, and there's a huge overpopulation problem on the Nile. And there's a lot of ecology problems and traffic problems. It's one of the most urbanized areas in the world, Cairo. Traffic's so terrible, 3 o'clock in the morning, it's still bad. So you have to sort all that out, right? So you need all this infrastructure. Well, it turns out all the stuff we're building south of the border is real good for them. So it's just amazing to every place you go, you got some solution. You meet so many heads of state, you meet ministers, Fortune 500 CEOs, and they all start with the same conversation. I have a problem. They don't say, I want to buy a crypto, I want to buy a blockchain. They say, I have a problem. And then when you go through it, what you usually can discover is there's a trust problem. There's a liquidity problem. There's a globalization problem. There's a audit problem. And if you have those kinds of problems, you need a blockchain. And Cardano is the chain we built for these types of things. And we built it hand in glove. Now, it takes years to roll all these things out, maybe even decades, but those people aren't going anywhere. People in Burundi aren't going to wake up and be like, this whole Burundi thing's not working out for me. We're just all going to move to like Lesotho. That's not happening. that's where they live. That's where the families are. And that infrastructure is coming online and we're there. We're talking to people, we're building things, and that's just Africa. And then we have a great DApp ecosystem that we're building across the board. There's over 100 DApps that are in the launch horizon about 3 to 6 months now that Pluto's application backend is turning on. And everything from DEXs like Sunday Swap and Meld to NFT marketplaces to oracles to what Cody's doing with Jed. So, there's a great competitive ecosystem that's starting to brew with Cardano. And we can certainly go into that and why that's interesting. But then they always ask, who are the consumers of these things? And that's not a 25-year-old kid living in his mom's basement in New Jersey who's trading NFTs and real big fan of Doge. That's a subsistence farmer who lives off of a few dollars a day. And that app is the difference between them being able to survive, thrive, and grow wealth and basically being completely wiped out, living in a refugee camp somewhere as diaspora. Okay, that's what we signed up for. And so it's life's work, it's a life mission. And we built Cardano for these use cases in mind. And if we get it right, we're bringing trillions of dollars of collective wealth and power into the global economy that has previously been excluded from the global economy. And we're doing it in a very fair, open, and transparent way that's very egalitarian.
That's amazing. And some questions which are maybe a bit macro level. You touched on it. Are these, sounds like these folks are open at least to this technology and these solutions that are being brought before them? Because one of my questions was going to be, are you seeing any roadblocks with them not understanding? And once again, this is not an overnight thing. It's going to take time to get these folks on board to build this out. And do you see the different countries in Africa, this kind of being the forefront of the fourth industrial revolution, so to speak?
Yes, I think it's absolutely right. The fourth industrial revolution is going to hit Africa before the developed world, because they have no systems to hang on to. Whenever you talk about an upgrade, you're going from Windows 10 to Windows 11. You're already pretty happy with your Windows 10 experience. You got a lot of legacy applications. You get a little worried. If I upgrade to Windows 11, it might break all these apps that I love, and who knows when they're going to get fixed. I'm going to wait a little bit. You have an incumbency thing, okay? And then take that in an economy. You have trillions of dollars of wealth to protect. Look at America. Every financial regulation, the regulator's got to say, well, what's this mean for Goldman Sachs? What's this mean for Morgan Stanley? What's this mean for Chase? What's this mean for the CME? What's this mean for NYSE? All this stuff. There's just so much stuff there. What's this mean for grandma's pension and the $10 trillion that sits around those 401ks? Okay, so there's a lot of legacy there. But if you're an upstart and you're moving away from a paper-based system that has no legacy, you can do crazy shit. It's kind of like Japan right after World War II. The whole country was burned to the ground. We firebombed almost every city except for Kyoto. And then we got tired of firebombing and started carpet nuking them. Okay, that's as destroyed as you can get. And so in the ruins of that, in 1945, the Japanese had to pick themselves up and say, we have to rebuild an entirely new country and an entirely new political system from the ground up. Now, they could have stayed in a burnt down, destroyed state, but instead what they did is they adopted very, very clever new ways of doing business. And then suddenly you have the Toyota miracle, and then suddenly you have the Sony miracle, and they became a major player for decades, and their economy grew to the second largest economy in the world, now third with the rise of China. So when you are starting from bedrock and you're clever, you can have new systems. And so Africa has that built-in advantage, and they can be very clever about the scale. So instead of building electric grids designed for a nation state, you build microgrids designed for a village that are wired together in a much more resilient way. If one of those grids fails, it takes out the village, not the country. If the power grid in the United States fails, remember the blackout we had in the East Coast for a little while? It was like 13 states or something like that went off just like that. You see, so you have much more resilient power grid. The same for ISPs. If you only have a few monopolies competing, it's slow, expensive, and bad customer service. If you have cooperatives, you get significant competition, super cheap data, high quality, these types of things. And always evolving, always changing, always growing, and so forth. You see, so there, you can have so much better systems in a 10 or 20 year time horizon. Money system, there's already M-Pesa. and look at the continental appeal of M-Pesa and how quickly that grew. So there are already people running around in Kenya totally okay with private money. They've accepted it for years. They understand it. So you go and say, yeah, we're going to build a stable coin and that's better than a nation's currency. You don't need a central bank. Oh yeah, fine. It's like M-Pesa. They're pre-trained for this. They think of this. It's super easy. So I think Africa is definitely in a great position to leapfrog. The other thing is there's a lot of really brilliant Africans. People forget this. So what happens is they get born, they go to college in Africa, they're sovereigns. And then for opportunity, they go to Europe, they go to North America, they go to Asia, and they get academic positions or start companies there. Look at Elon Musk. He left South Africa, he went to America, started SpaceX and Tesla. When you start improving the local economies, people start coming home. We saw this with China for a long, long time because of Cultural Revolution and other problems. Almost all the elite of China fled out of China. Yep. All the academics and so forth. But then in the 90s and the 2000s, they started going back to China and they started starting businesses in China and innovating in China because they're like, wow, I get to be with my family and I make just as much or more money here. So in addition to big infrastructural improvements, that brain death that's occurred where people have left and there's an exodus, they'll come back. And when they come back, they're going to found fundamentally new kinds of companies. Instead of C corporations and LLCs, these 20th century notions of things, they'll start DAOs. They'll be open source first. They'll be using open source tools that have very cooperative, collaborative business models that wire into that. So we're going to see not just infrastructural improvements and social improvements and digitization and private ownership of data as opposed to monopolistic corporations and surveillance economy, but then you're also going to see all kinds of innovations in business structure and financing. The SMEs will be able to do IPOs as STOs at the $10 million, $20 million range or so forth. So when I look at my life and say, you know, if I'm 55 and I look back to 35, you know, what's the arc of the 21 years from 34 to 55? You know, what does that look like? I say by the time I'm 55, the greatest economic growth I'm going to see is going to occur in Africa. And the most meaningful opportunity we have for change with fair new systems, new forms of capitalism are going to come from Africa. They're not going to come from the ossified United States where, you know, we're thinking about taxing unrealized capital gains and wealth tax and all this madness. It's not going to come from Europe where it's just like protecting the aristocracy. And it's not going to come from China that's all about social credit and grandizing a dictator and these types of things. It's not coming from those sources. It's going to come from people who have nothing to lose and everything to gain and a lot of passion, a lot of merit, a lot of excitement. And there's 1.2 billion of them. So that's a lot, you know, and that's an army to get things done. And by doing that, it'll actually change the rest of the world. They have to compete with Africa. So it means the US system will actually look a lot more like the African system than the US system.
Wow. I did want to touch on the partnerships with Dish and Boost Mobile. How did those come about and how will those companies be leveraging Cardano?
Well, you know, Dish and Boost is kind of like a startup. They're a 40-year-old company, but their business model is fundamentally changing. So they've had to do this a few times. Originally, they just sold the hardware because the satellite signals were unencrypted. You know, they kind of treated it like antennas that you put on your televisions, the old rabbit ears, if you remember those. Yeah. And then they say, hey, in 1988, they started encrypting the television signals. So they had moved to a subscription service. And at their all-time high, they were about 13 million subscribers. Now they're down to about 9. And that trend is continuing. So that business model is with cord cutting is really not as viable as it used to be. So they look to the future and they say, well, why don't we become a data company? So they're going to replace Sprint. T-Mobile bought Sprint. And now there's only 3 major carriers, Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile. Mm-hmm. And the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, said we need a 4th person in that slot. So Dish came in, they bought billions of dollars worth of spectrum, and they're rolling out a 5G network across the entire United States, 70% of the US coverage by 2023. That's just like what we're trying to do with World Mobile in a micro sense in Zanzibar, or what we'll eventually have to do in Burundi. So Dish needs to unify all of its models from Sling to Boost to the subscribers on the TVs to the new cell phones that are coming. And there's a lot of opportunity there for business model innovation. So it's a great relationship because At the very least, what we can do is have conversations about what does identity look like in the 21st century. And you can prevent SIM boosting, and you can have lower fraud rates, and then you can have friction-free marketplaces to link customers on, like DraftKings. You can do one-click account creation and stuff like that once you have a compliance put in with a DID. But then you can put wallets on, loyalty points on, all of these things. You could build this infrastructure up. And then eventually at the macro scale, you could talk about how do you tokenize capacity on a next generation 5G network, because Dish is actually going to have the most advanced 5G network in the United States because they're building it from scratch. Verizon has this legacy infrastructure. AT&T has legacy infrastructure. They can virtualize the whole thing with Open RAN and VMware and all these things. So it's like pure software-defined networking. So they have the most advanced network, the lowest operating cost network. So how about we transform that with some tokenomics and some capacity exchange and these types of things? So it's a very long-term relationship. And, there's a lot of milestones and deliverables. And the first is just getting DIDs on the phones and getting them anchored in Cardano. And then the next thing is to get wallets and other such things, and years and years of building. And, they have 8 million customers just on Boost, 22 million throughout the entire Dish ecosystem. And as they step up into prominence and start kicking the hell out of Verizon and AT&T and T-Mobile and gaining subscribers, they could wake up with 50 million customers, 60 million customers, and be the gateway into those customers' financial services. Boost in particular is interesting because it's an NVMO, and a large amount of their customer base are undocumented. So they send money back to Mexico, El Salvador, other places. So if you build that infrastructure, and you can also have major plays with remittances and financial services in addition to all these other things. So it's a process.
I didn't know about that key factor you mentioned with the government. I think you said the FCC, saying that there has to be this other competitor, and that now they're going to kind of have a resurgence, take some of the market share.
Yeah, because of the Antitrust Act. So the Sherman Antitrust Act, the government has to look at the market structure. And if they determine that there's too much consolidation amongst a small group of companies, they have a duty to deconsolidate. And so they can either do that through direct intervention, where they break companies up. They tried to do that with Microsoft back in the 90s, and they did that successfully with Standard Oil. They broke that up as a result of the Sherman Antitrust Act. The other option is just to encourage more competition through other actors entering the marketplace. And the FCC in particular is a very powerful entity because they control the licensing of spectrum. So they have a direct say on who gets the broadcast and who doesn't. So they want at least 4 carriers to live in this market, because they can't just have it continue to consolidate. Because how horrible would cell phones be in the United States if there's only one cell phone carrier?
Yeah,
it would be pretty terrible.
Yeah, we need competition. That keeps things pretty good for the consumers. And it's great to hear that they are taking the next leap forward using blockchain and obviously Cardano to bring their customer database to an.
And it's important to understand that they're a big company, so they're going to be using many different solutions. Like they work with Helium and other blockchain solutions, and Cardano is just part of a larger puzzle. And we have an ecosystem, they have an ecosystem. There's some overlap, there's some differences. But the point is that they're willing to innovate because they have to. Whenever you're entering a new marketplace, you have to grow quickly, you have to innovate quickly, and you have to leapfrog your customers. And this is just a great case study of how blockchain can be a component in that innovation and leapfrog story for business transformation and digital transformation. And the Oregon family, they're very bright. It's still a family business Dish in this respect. And, Charlie and Chris and the rest of the gang, they really know what they're doing. And they have a lot of really great people there at Dish who work incredibly hard every day. And they've been doing that for 40 years. And they're really with it. They went to Satoshi Roundtable and all these other things, and they're deeply connected now in the cryptocurrency space. And they're kind of navigating all these things. And what they're doing is what every Fortune 250 company is doing privately. They're just doing it a little bit more publicly. They're asking a very fundamental innovation question, which is, what does blockchain and crypto mean for us? How does it transform us? Where does it give us an advantage? What parts of the business model does it make irrelevant or obsolete? And how do we leverage this technology to create business continuity, to preserve what we've already have, and to capture new marketplaces? So one of our specialties as a company, Input Output, is we are a partner in those conversations with companies and governments. That's one of our things we do in our PSG group, is we kind of look at their different processes and systems and we say, okay, well, let's talk about the future. Where's the world going to be in 2025, 2030? For example, I just brought up the spatial web, about 30 minutes ago in the interview. Well, that's going to fundamentally transform everything, including the way we search. Remember, when we went from web browsers to cell phones, that just didn't mean that we're spending all this time looking at a screen. It also meant that when we're searching for stuff, we're doing a search over mobile. Now, more than half of searches are done via voice. Mm. So when you go to a spatial web, it means that your interfaces for searching for things have now fundamentally changed. Yeah. Whoever controls those interfaces can point that towards Google or Bing or some other search engine, maybe DuckDuckGo or their own search engine. And the Google monopoly could be destroyed from something like that if they don't have a handle on. Facebook could be the largest search engine in the world. You see, so that's the beautiful part about technology, is that just because you're top dog today, new tech comes out and you lose your monopoly very quickly. And if you don't believe me, pull out your BlackBerry, go to Yahoo and search for your MySpace page, and then you'll see how quickly things change, right? And, Dish is in a great position where if they're very clever and they handle this transformation just the right way, they could be the most secure cell phone operator. They could be the easiest cell phone operator to do business with. They can have big infrastructural competitive advantages, especially in legacy things like roaming and data, and have much better quality of service. And then the subscribers could end up actually paying a lower subscription fee than Verizon or other things as a consequence of that. So they're better, faster, cheaper in every way. And because of that, they'll get mass customer acquisition and secure a business model for themselves. So these are the kinds of things we discuss and think about. And we kind of look to the future and say, well, what do you need to pre-put into your system to ensure that your system is resilient, not just today, but for the future? And usually there's a crypto component to that.
I want to ask a question. You probably can't give too much details here because I'm sure things are under NDA, PR, scheduled for PR release and so forth. Can we expect any new partnerships coming up by the end of the year, early next year? Anything you can give hints on there?
Well, I mean, we have some things in the queue, but what's really exciting are like the 100+ Dapps that are, kind of being built for Cardano. As I mentioned, everything from Sunday to others. And what's cool about that is that these are community driven. So these guys and gals, they took the Blues Pioneers program and they're just kind of queuing up. And people don't understand how quickly things can happen. It was just yesterday. It feels like yesterday that we had the Stake Pool Pioneers program, the SPO Pioneers, back in 2020, right before the release of Shelley. And we were thinking, God, how do we get to 500 stake pools? There's already 3,000 stake pools in the ecosystem. It's one of the largest, most decentralized set of decentralized consensus. Okay, so similarly, we have the Plutus Pioneers program, and the PAB is just kind of gradually rolling its way out, and all this infrastructure is starting to turn on. And there's going to be a few months of rough edges and people building things and questions about design patterns and improvement of the library. But very quickly, that's going to get resolved, and then suddenly you're going to have all of these apps in this ecosystem floating around. And every single one of them has different solutions to different problems, and they are going to define Cardano far more than anything we do or partnerships we do. We're a transformational company. We do B2G2C and B2B2C, and we're very mission oriented as a company about banking the unbanked and doing economic identity. We carry a lot of load because we created Cardano for populating Cardano, but the most growth of Cardano, what's going to take us from 2 million people to 20 million people, is going to occur from that DApp ecosystem. So what matters far more, beautiful interfaces, a great DApp store, a certification program to ensure that DApps are safe so you don't have all of these hacks that have occurred in the DeFi space. And these are the kinds of things I think about to make sure that there's good foundations for people to stand on, and also surgically going in and just kind of making sure that those DApps have technical support, like Cardano Stack Exchange. When they ask a question, answer the question there. Documentation, make sure the documentation looks good. If they have a really hard problem they're trying to solve, co-develop something, build something. Like, for example, what makes a good algorithmic stablecoin? We pulled a Hyperloop there. So we went and wrote this beautiful paper called JED, which is an algorithmic stablecoin And we've implemented big chunks of it as a reference, and we just open source it. And Cody's coming in and taking it, and now they're going to implement it, bring it to market and so forth. They're a completely independent company. And other people are going to take that model and implement their version of it. There'll probably be a dozen, just like Hyperloop, a dozen different JED-based stable coins. But we know that that stable coin is built on Granite. It's a very, very good design. It's mechanized, so it's formally proven with theorem provers and these types of things. So it's really, really smart and well done in that respect. So these are the kinds of things that I care a lot about, and I think are ultimately what are going to define the ecosystem. You're in a lot of trouble if you say you're decentralized, but then you have to rely on a custodial company to keep hyping and building things. We saw that with Tron and these other ventures, and they never get you anywhere. There's only so much a front man can do. It's either decentralized and it's got an ecosystem and people are building that in ecosystem, or not. Bitcoin has that. Ethereum has that. And we're seeing all of those elements in Cardano brewing up. Nobody goes anywhere. I mean, they're tattooing the logo on their body. I mean, come on, man. That's telling you that these people are pretty committed and they're not going anywhere. And that's a very sticky community. So it's going to keep growing on those foundations, and every metric from transaction volume. The last 3 epochs, we had more transactions than in the first entire year of Cardano combined. This shows you how much transaction growth that we've had inside the system, And, we had some criticism here and there. Like I saw the Avalanche guys say, oh, well, they can only do 1 transaction a block and it's 0.25 transactions per second. It's like, okay. They don't really seem to understand anything about our programming model. And they also didn't read any of our papers. But, that stuff comes. And it doesn't bother me at all, because at the end of the day, it's like we did all the homework. We wrote 125 papers. We have a really good understanding of how this tech works, how things fit in. We know how to increase the block size. We know how to increase the network capacity. We have this beautiful design called input endorsers coming out. It's kind of like our DAG, our answer to DAGs in the space. So you get like mass throughput with this type of thing. And also, because we have strong root of trust, you can bootstrap permission side chains that are high volume, high performance from that root of trust, from those 3,000 stake pools we have. This didn't come out of a vacuum. This all was designed in 2016 and 2017 and 2018 and 2019. We wrote it all down and it went through peer review. In some cases, the people criticizing us were on the peer review committees. They seem to not have any problem with it back when they were on the committees, and they accepted it for peer review and peer conferences. But now that they're commercial competitors, they say stuff. And you're like, who cares? That ecosystem will speak for itself.
And in the crypto community, and I think Rob Powell was talking about this when Metcalfe's law, a lot of tribalism, a lot of maximalism, because people are financially incentivized based on the token they're holding. It's a bit of that, right? I've noticed a lot of the stuff thrown Cardano's way to your way. And it's just people throwing stones because they don't want to see their respective holdings or blockchain being outdone. I mean, I don't know if you agree with that, or if
yeah. And also, when people do these things, either they misunderstand or they have a misalignment of incentives. Those are the 2 anchors. And you can, with education and good product marketing, gradually resolve the misconceptions and just demonstration. If people claim it doesn't work, show them it's working. There's smart contracts running on Cardano right now. It's like, it's there, it exists. And then on the misalignment of incentives, that gradually resolved itself, because if you keep succeeding, if they're in a sum zero, they die, or they change your model, in which case they no longer have an incentive to criticize you. In fact, many cases you can partner. So it's a game of time and persistence, and time is on our side. It's still very early days in the industry. There's no notion of like some winner take all network effect. And if you don't get it done in 12 months, it's over. People have been saying that with 2-cent ADA, $2 ADA. It's like, it's like, guys, come on. It's the ecosystem just keeps growing. It still gets stronger. The security of Cardano is unparalleled. The price does matter from the perspective of security. It costs over $30 billion to attack Cardano. It's one of the most expensive attacks in the world from a consensus related attack. So, things are happening, and we're actually developing faster than we've ever developed before in every metric. And we're very comfortable with the technology and the roadmap. And, we're also incredibly transparent about it. Despite all the criticism, Cardano 360 still occurs every month. and the mid-month updates still come out, and blog posts come out, usually 3-4 a month. And I do my AMAs, and all of our people talk all the time, conferences and publish papers, and we write code, and our repos are all open. We're still number 1 for GitHub commits 4 years running, number 2 for transaction volume, right behind Bitcoin, ahead of Ethereum. So there's a lot of magic there in the ecosystem.
I'd have to say I appreciate the transparency of you doing those AMAs. I wish more founders and folks who are building would do that and have that open discourse. There was a question that came from the community about staking pool operators. I don't know if the premise to this is correct, but it was, how do we maintain decentralization if more institutional money comes in to be stake pool operators? And once again, I don't know if the premise of that is correct, but if you can answer that.
Well, if you look at the Gini coefficient of Cardano, it's significantly better than its peers, Ethereum and Solana and others, because of the way it was distributed and because of the drift of currency throughout the years. It's actually one of the most retail friendly of all of the cryptocurrencies. So one of the solutions is just make sure you have a lot of small holders, in which case you have a lot more organic delegation. Institutional money creates these power blocks, and we saw that most with EOS. Like it got so bad that exchanges were selling validators and these types of things. And there are other examples of that. And there's several solutions you can have. You can do things like introducing bonding or locking mechanisms, and that it removes institutions from participating, because a lot of cases those are on-demand accounts, and in which case they can't legally have their tokens locked. And so that's one side of it. We also have a construct called enterprise addresses, which can't stake. And then also you can let users on exchanges actually have some say in where their tokens are delegated. So instead of auto-delegating to like the Binance pool or something like that, the user can actually access a web staking dashboard and delegate to stake pools. The longer-term solution is a cooperation amongst stake pools themselves. So instead of looking at it as a sum zero, it's either my pool or your pool. You look at portfolios and you do partial delegation. So this is a feature that I've been wanting to have for 2 years now, and we're working on it. It's just there's so many things to do. But basically, the idea is that when you have your delegation interface, instead of delegating atomically everything to one pool, you delegate to a collection of pools, and you have a portfolio there. So that'll create a lot more diversity instead of this radical variance that we have in the system. And the other thing is that by creating, we wrote a paper called Conclave, which talks about decentralized pool management. Smaller pools, if they're having difficulty surviving, they can form a cooperative and they can merge their pledge together and their pool operations together. And 4 or 5 pools can become one pool, but they're collectively owned by a collection of people. So that's one way you achieve decentralization, even though you have less pools, because you have one collective pool. It's a federated pool in a certain respect. It has federated control logic. So the Conclave paper, I think, is very valuable. But it's an interesting problem. In the longest term solutions, multi-resource consensus. So you go from just pure proof of stake to proof of stake plus something else, like proof of merit or proof of work or other such things. And we actually have a design for that we've been creating. It's called Minotaur, and we'll publish that paper at some point. So we've been thinking about what's the 4th generation look like of cryptocurrencies. And, there's a long roadmap for these things for Cardano in 2025. But, it's with all problems. It's an endless game. You optimize, and then an adversary comes in and they defeat the optimization. So then you defeat that adversary, but then another guy comes in. It's like digital rights management. You figure out a way to protect your DVD. Somebody breaks the encryption, and now it goes on the Pirate Bay, and people will hack it. And then you create a new form of encryption, a new scheme, and then somebody breaks that. Or Wi-Fi. You have WPA. Oh, it's great. It got broke. WPA2. Oh, it's great. It got broke. WPA3. So you just keep building your standards, and over time you get much more secure, and the cost of doing an attack is higher. But it's never zero. You're always going to have, something there, and it's never completely fair because life is not fair.
Sure.
Bill Gates has children, and those kids are doing pretty good. And some people are born as subsistence farmers in Burundi with no running water, no power. There's this thing called the genetic lottery and the geographic lottery. And some people are born with extraordinary talents and great geographies, and they're in the right place at the right time. Other people are born in terrible, abject conditions, and they're not in that field. So given those inequalities, you can't really make life fair. So it's kind of crazy to believe that you can build this perfect protocol where every parameter in the protocol is going to be completely fair. It's just not the case.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you strive for as much as possible to get to a certain place, but like you said, multiple iterations. You just have to keep chipping away at it and upgrade as needed. A couple other questions that came up: Cardano's network stablecoins, DJET and Cody and Singularity Net, SigUSD. This is a question from the community. Which will be the most used and why? I don't know if you can answer that, but
I mean, I don't take positions because I'm in a somewhat still custodial role, so I don't want to pick winners and losers. But there is an enormous demand for algorithmic stablecoins, and frankly, I think those are the only ones that count in crypto. It's not crypto when you have an asset-backed stablecoin. They're absolutely valuable and necessary. But if the only reason you're valuable is because of a promise of a centralized company to store something in a bank account, it's not really crypto. It's not. And it's fair for the US government to come in and say, oh, let's regulate these things like banks, because effectively that's what they are. I mean, if you look at, I won't name names, but certain stable coins, and they say they're backed 1-to-1, and then suddenly it's commercial paper and other things. But don't worry, that was just a loan to ourselves. We'll pay it back. Trust us. There's too much temptation when it goes from millions to billions to tens of billions to hundreds of billions to cheat. The worst offender is the US government. In the 1970s, when Nixon took us off the gold standard, this triggered Ron Paul to run for Congress because he said, now that they've done that, they're going to destroy the US currency in 5 decades. And he was right. Yeah. They went from relatively stable money. It lost some value, but it was at least constrained by some laws of physics, to printing $6 trillion out of thin air, and then holding press conferences and saying, well, as long as you discount the price of fish, beef, and pork and chicken, inflation for food is not so bad. I mean, it's like Baghdad Bob. It's like the tanks are not in Baghdad. That's not an Abrams behind me. That's not an American flag. Don't pay attention to that. But I'm going to move over here to block it. I mean, this is literally where they're at. 20% real inflation, and if not greater. It's $6 per gallon gasoline over in California. And to tell you how fucked up the economy is, the spot price of West Texas Intermediate oil on the futures market, negative $37 a barrel. They're paying people to take the oil because of storage problems. On the other side of the supply chain, California paying at the pump $6.60 in Los Angeles to fill up premium 91 in your tank. All-time high for gasoline. That's how fucked up the supply chain is right now with these crazy Keynesian economics that have been pushed on us in this respect. So I don't know, take it as you will. And this is why crypto is here. It's why, if you add up the market capitalizations of all the cryptos, we're worth more than the bottom 100 countries in the world's currency systems added together.
Wow.
Just think about that. And that's magic internet money that didn't exist 12 years ago.
So I want to touch on a few things with regards to the crypto market, such as US crypto regulations. Obviously, the SEC blocking Coinbase lending, lawsuit against Ripple, they're going after Terra Luna. What are your thoughts? And is it Congress that has to step in here? Maybe a new regulatory body, even though I don't like big government, another regulatory body specific to cryptocurrencies. What are your thoughts on all this?
So first off, the U.S. needs to move to a functional regulation system instead of a definitional system. We've moved beyond the world that something's a commodity and something's a currency and something's a security. It needs to be regulated based on how it's used. So you need a different regulatory system. And that doesn't really map so well in the US, because usually what we do is we create a regulatory body for an asset type. So the CFTC handles commodities and derivatives. The Securities Exchange Commission handles securities, these types of things. Okay. Second, we need to move to a system for regulation that has much better definitions about things. So we don't really have a good definition of virtual asset service provider in the United States. We don't really have a definition of what is a utility token, versus a security token and these types of things. So we need a better functional model and we need a better asset definitional model, and they need to be applied together. Third, the way that enforcement's done in the US regulatory system is through private financial surveillance. And that doesn't work in crypto. So we need to think more carefully about automated enforcement through smart contracts. Because normally when you are a body, let's say the Treasury Department, like FinCEN or something like that, and you go to a bank and you say to banks, okay, if you see weird patterns, you report them to us. And that's called suspicious activity reports. They're called SARs. Okay, so that means 99% of the time, it's not the IRS discovering something on its own or the SEC discovering something or FinCEN discovering something. It's actually reported to them by a financial intermediary. But when you remove all these financial intermediaries, then suddenly you have this issue that you've made all the regulators blind. They actually don't know what's going on. They can't see things. And so a lot of the recent legislation and regulatory activity is stemming around a desire to get financial surveillance back in some capacity, like the broker registration requirement that was in the infrastructure bill and so forth. So it's a really complicated Rubik's Cube, but I think the solution to it is just through open standards and basically saying we can build into the transaction, into the settlement of the transaction itself, some adherence to regulation. That's not necessarily compulsory. It can be optional, but it's something that you can do. So you know that up front. So you say, okay, this is Coinbase. If I'm going to send money to Coinbase, I have to have the following payload in my transaction. And if it doesn't settle. But if I do put that in there, it settles, in which case when it gets to Coinbase, Coinbase knows already they're in full compliance with the law. They don't need a compliance officer. They don't need a compliance desk. It's all algorithmic. And if the regulator comes to them, they can show the audit trail and say, I have all the things. It's right built into the transaction. And then what I can do as an engineer is I can sit down and say, how do I protect privacy? How do I ensure confidentiality? How do I ensure that the metadata is provable but not leakable? These types of things. You see, and there's all these advanced cryptographic protocols, from the usage of trusted hardware to zero knowledge cryptography and other things that we could put into the system to accommodate that. That I, as an engineer, can go to the regulator and say, what do you guys want? What do you care about? Is it tax compliance? Is it anti-money laundering, anti-terrorist financing? What do you care about in KYC? And we can get them actually significantly better adherence to their standards, whether it be Basel II or whatever the standards they have, than the legacy system. The legacy system's terrible. JP Morgan Chase has got $19 billion in fines over the last 20 years for compliance failures. So, if the largest bank in the world can't do it right with, billions of dollars a year in compliance costs, what chance does, a small bank in Colorado have or something like that? So it's not working for anybody on any side of the dimension. So I think that there's a big conversation going on. And the biggest impediment, to be honest with you, about our ability to proceed is age. The people who are making the decisions are in their 70s and 80s, and I don't even think they know how computers work, much less the internet or any of these other things. Like the infrastructure bill, the person who blocked our ability to fix that terrible, terrible provision that's unenforceable was an 84-year-old senator named Shelby, who's retiring next year.
Yep.
So what's that tell you? If an 84-year-old guy who didn't give a shit about anything wants $50 billion for the military, is able to block something, there's something fundamentally wrong and sick in Washington. So you can be frustrated about it. You can thump your chest and say, oh, they're all out to get us. Or you can say, look, we just got to put our nose to the grindstone, lobby, elect younger officials, and over time, we'll get to a point where we can get a reset. And in the medium time, let's just try to minimize the damage that they can do so this industry doesn't get compromised. And the world is moving on. Singapore is moving on. Malta is moving on. Liechtenstein is moving on. Switzerland's moving on. Even the UK is moving on. They're creating sandboxes and asset definitions and functional regulation. And if a US doesn't do this, it's not like the industry is going to go away. They're just going to build a moat around the United States, just like we built a moat around New York after BitLicense was passed, and the industry will move on and grow. There's a reason Coinbase is in California, not in New York City. And New York is supposed to be the place for exchanges.
Yeah, well put. Quick question on CBDCs. You mentioned privacy. I've interviewed Chris Giancarlo of the Digital Project. One of the things I talked to him about was how do we maintain the Constitution and right to privacy and things like that. We don't want to be like China. If we get a digital dollar, and we see every central bank in the world is building this, we get a digital dollar. How do we maintain it? What are your thoughts on that? Good or bad CBDCs?
Well, as I said, algorithmic stablecoins are the only fair type of stablecoin in my mind because you get your crypto guarantees. That said, if you have a fiat digital currency, then it's just like Bitcoin and Ether in that it doesn't have something backing it. And as a consequence, it can be wrapped and actually put into a cryptocurrency and controlled by a smart contract. Mm-hmm. So you can create a trustless asset-backed stablecoin. And actually, I think CBDCs are very positive for crypto because you can create baskets of them. So if I want to create an inflation-resistant currency and there's CBDCs, I can take the digital dollar, the digital yuan, digital commodities, and other such things, and I can put them into a basket of things. And then that basket is an index that basically is inflation-resistant. And that becomes an international reserve currency for trade and as a unit of account and for lending purposes and so forth. And in an age of negative interest rates and an age of unlimited hyperinflationary monetary policy, I think that's a very good thing to have that option because, we all got to start making some decisions here. I mean, there's only so many years that you can watch gasoline go from $3 to $6 to $12 to $24 before you start really changing your behavior. And by that, I mean, like taking all your money out of the bank and buying crypto and buying gold and buying land and things that are inflation resistant. And we will see a mass exodus into that system if this unrestricted monetary policy continues. So CBDCs are part of a broader conversation about global liquidity. And actually, they're the secret sauce that make metastable tokens actually work. And I think ultimately are going to improve things instead of harm things. Now, that said, what is concerning is if you bundle them with social credit. That's what China is doing. So I am concerned about certain privacy considerations. I'm concerned about the unrestricted ability to freeze people's money. Civil asset forfeiture is definitely a thing. And in the cash world, it happens. The digital currency world, it hasn't happened because they're irreversible at the moment. But if a CBDC comes, the CBDC can be frozen. People have to ask, are they comfortable with the money that somebody they've never met, who doesn't give a shit about them, at any given time for political reasons or otherwise can push a button and freeze their money and make them go from a billionaire to broke at a drop of a hat? Most people aren't comfortable with that reality. And that's actually on the fine print, what a CBDC can do. Yeah. So I think most people will opt for assets that don't have those capabilities, but are just as valuable, just as liquid, and merchants accept just the same.
I want to wrap it up here with some quick fun questions. There was a question from the community. What's your favorite Simpsons episode? If you have one.
I mean, there are so many, but Simpsons, the seasons about 2 to 9 was probably one of the greatest animated shows ever made. And by the way, Conan O'Brien was a writer for them right around that time period. Wow. And so that's why the Simpsons were so well written. He was just a comedic genius. It's like when Mr. Burns decided to take over the power plant and, shut off power for the whole city. And he went down all the different chambers. And that was a great, infosec analogy. The April Fool's episode where, Bart got the beer can and shook it up with the mixer and then it crippled Homer and he was in a coma. That was just an absolutely amazing. The Fugu episode, if you remember, where Homer ate the tainted fish and he thought he was going to die. That was great. There's been some great Treehouse of Horror ones, like with Willie being Freddy Krueger. That was I thought extremely well done. Okay. The best part about the early days Simpsons was that it was just really intelligent comedy and it was layered. So I understood it as a kid. And when I rewatched them as an adult, there was like all these nuances that I completely missed. I think a better way of answering the question is, when did the Simpsons for me get bad? And I do remember that episode. It was the episode where they completely destroyed the character of Principal Skinner. So for 9 seasons, Principal Skinner was this badass Green Beret who fought in Vietnam, who was like the straight-laced principal. And, it was epitomized by that episode where Bart played hooky and skipped out of school. And then Skinner was like trying to hunt him down and chase him down. And he like walks into the river and everything like the Terminator, and it was just a great episode. Skinner was a legitimate badass. And then suddenly they make this episode up where he's pretending to be Skinner and he's actually Armin Tanzarian, and they just destroy the entire character for no reason whatsoever. And there they kind of said, we're no longer as a show committed to growing the characters or refining the characters or honoring the characters you've kind of fallen in love with. At any given time, we'll just destroy everything you love for, a quick laugh that's not even that funny and move on. And I think after that, I kind of lost a lot of interest in the show. And within 2 seasons, I was done. And I haven't seen an episode of The Simpsons in probably 20 years because of that.
Yeah, same. I think the same time period you mentioned, the 90s and so forth, it was really great. Now, not so much. All right, quick rapid fire. Favorite food?
I grew up in Hawaii. So my favorite food as a kid was Spam, spiced processed artificial meat, shoulder, pork, and ham. And actually Hawaii's largest consumer of Spam in the world. And they had the Spam musubi. It's this little piece of rice. They put Spam on it. They teriyaki fry it and they wrap it in seaweed and have it. And everybody said, God, that's disgusting. And they try it and they're like, oh, that's actually pretty good. So I really, really enjoy that. Favorite desserts, tiramisu. Favorite meat, probably bison. That's why I ranch them.
Very nice. Favorite musician or band?
Well, for classic rock, it's Boston. I mean, I got a More Than a Feeling. You'll love him for a long time. Favorite composer is Chopin. I think he really was probably the best romantic era musician. Favorite symphony writer is Beethoven. It's incomparable, especially the Seventh Symphony movement too. Is just incredible. And the structural complexity and elegance of that is just astounding. Modern composers, Ramin Djawadi and Max Richter are both extremely good. Djawadi did the soundtrack for Game of Thrones and Westworld and all those other things. And Richter has done some really good things too. And so, yeah, there's a lot of really cool people. But actually lately I've been getting into algorithmically generated music because of Crypto Bison. We're launching that on Cardano. So we were really thinking, can you create NFTs that actually can be in a PvP music setting where the music is generated by noise from the blockchain and player interactions, and it's algorithmically generated. And actually, can you make that music sound good? There's even a Haskell library for music. It's called Euterpia. And you can actually use Haskell to generate music. It's really mind warping shit. And so I've been getting into a lot of experimental music as a consequence.
Wow. That is so fascinating. Generating music for the blockchain. Favorite movie?
I'm a huge fan of Blade Runner, and actually both of them, but Blade Runner 2049, I think is just, if you are a film student and you want to know, like, what is a modern day Citizen Kane or Apocalypse Now, or these things in terms of cinematography, pacing, plot design, and just overall how to build a really good, well-structured movie that has durability behind it. That's definitely something. You still have questions. Like the original Blade Runner, we're still asking is, Decker a replicant or not?
Right.
What's that unicorn dream mean? And these types of things. And what does it mean to be human? And then we remember the characters like Roy Batty in the soliloquy, Tears and Rain, these types of things. There's a certain fungibility to cinema these days. And unfortunately, it's only getting worse. And so every day you have a Marvel movie coming out. Do you remember any of them? I remember the original Iron Man because Robert Downey Jr. was so good in that, and that was great. It was a lot of fun. And Thanos was a pretty good villain. Got kudos to Josh Brolin for that. But then you look at, there's like 30 other movies around that, and they're so forgettable. But then when you look at things like Blade Runner or There Will Be Blood or No Country for Old Men or these things, they're just hauntingly rememberable. Right. In the case of Blade Runner 2049, the relationship between Kay and Joy, two artificial beings, and it's not clear if they're actually expressing emotion or imitating emotion to each other. And you still never know, did Joy actually love Kay or not? Or is she just programmed? Even if she was programmed, is it still love? And what is consciousness? These types of things. What's the value of life? And these types of things. Just fascinating. But good movies got to do that. And if they do that, Daddy likes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Blade Runner. I recently watched Blade Runner 2049 again. I probably watched it like 10 times. I love watching it again and seeing what I missed, and the complexities and the layers to the story is just so great.
And the cinematography,
Oh, yeah.
just like when he goes to Las Vegas and he's walking into that red desert and there's the bees and those statues, that's not easy to do. I mean, the only other person I think that has Danny Villeneuve's ability to collaborate with the cinematographer was Kurosawa in the movie Ran. So what made that movie so special was that he spent 10 years before he made the movie painting the actual storyboards for it. So if you Google Kurosawa Ran storyboards, you actually see the paintings. They're just beautiful. And he painted them himself. This is like slightly autistic Japanese guy, just like being a shut-in in his elder ages, his eyesight going out, like meticulously painting storyboard after storyboard after storyboard. He had thousands of them. And then he went to shoot Ran and it comes out and it's just remarkable. The way that the colors come together, the blood, the scene, the plot line. And it's basically King Lear in Japan. That's what it is. It's like, okay. But man, wow, it is just such a beautiful movie when you actually see those pieces come together. And it's just something you keep coming back to again and again. So there are so few times in cinema where you just knock it out of the park like that. And it's just so magical. And it's, it's just, also he did The Seven Samurai, and that was a phenomenal movie as well. And then of course we Americans, we like copying things. So we did The Magnificent Seven based on The Seven Samurai. Unforgiven was another just incredible, because I was a big fan of the spaghetti westerns, like, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and A Fistful of Dollars. And, those the Italian westerns were great. But Unforgiven was just great because Clint Eastwood said, this is my last western. So I'm going to end that character as a spiritual successor in this movie. And we're just going to really do this well. And just some of those lines, like, any man who don't want to get killed best go out the back. It's like, wow, okay, Clint he's one of a kind, and so that's probably the most vertically integrated of the experiences, where you have the actor and director being the same person. And then it's also a spiritual successor to what made the actor famous. So he has a deep personal connection to that damn movie. And so, yeah, if you're a film student, I think you should definitely look at Unforgiven as well, and how that was paced and drawn out. And the other great part about Unforgiven is it didn't take itself too seriously.
Right.
And it's so easy to do that in these dark, gritty Westerns. That's the problem with like the DC universe with all their things. They're like, Batman equals dark and gritty. It's the fucking Snyder universe. Everybody's got to be depressed. Everything's got to be gray. Everybody's got to be like, I cut myself to feel. And it's like, God, it's like a 17-year-old emo at high school wrote this. This is like Twilight. This is horrible. Like, nobody understands me. But, the Unforgiven, it was serious, but then you still had, the British guy, you still had the leaks in the roof, and the sheriff was fixing the roof and so forth. And so there was an element of levity there that was pretty magical and special. And so I think about a lot of this stuff because I own a game development company as well. I've been buying all this game IP like Legends of Valor. And to be honest with you, I think movies are turning into games.
Yeah.
Last movie I went to at a movie theater was a while ago because of COVID, but I distinctly remember the girl who was sitting to the left of me, some teenage gal, she had her cell phone out. She was texting somebody. And then the guy who was sitting to the right of me, he had his cell phone out. He's texting during the middle of the movie.
Yeah.
Nobody's paying attention anymore. No. But video games, they still pay attention. They sit down for hours and hours and hours in flow in the game, really, really committed. And if you look at the stories in video games, like the God of War series, for example, especially the last God of War, like, holy shit, when he has to go back and get the blades of chaos that he had buried, and they have the ghost version of Athena talking to him and calling him a monster. It was just anything in cinema. It's just as good. And so when you look at Unreal 5 and you look at these new engines that are coming and you look at that projection, I think within the next 5-10 years, that medium is so good that anything films can do, that medium is far, far better. And the really successful actors of the future are going to be video game characters and the people who played those video game characters.
Well, it all plays into the metaverse that is coming.
seems like. And by the way, for Unforgiven, one of my favorites as well. And you mentioned the kind of light humor that's put into that. I remember when Clint is in the bar when he confronts everybody and he's like, "You fat man, speak." And
Yes.
It was like he's ready to kill everybody, but he's like, "You fat man, speak."
Yeah, it's just so great. Unforgiven, and it was a hell of a way to end a career and say, I'm not a Western guy anymore. This is the way. So it was so special because it was a director honoring his character and an actor honoring his genre and bookending both of them. He created the genre and he ended the genre. It's like, wow, that was great. True Grit, the remake, was really well done too. They had the original John Wayne, and then they did it again with what was his name?
Josh Brolin?
No, it wasn't Josh Brolin. It was the guy playing the Big Lebowski, Jeff Bridges.
Oh, Jeff Bridges.
Yeah, they did. Yeah. By the way, the Big Lebowski was another phenomenal movie. I don't know where the fuck the Coen brothers come up with these ideas, but they're magical, man. Like the iron lung, and then he's just hitting the car with the glove and everything. And those lines, like, that's just your opinion, man. I just don't know how they come up with it. It was so amazing. I wish I had drugs like that.
Finally, I want to ask you and let you go your favorite book.
Well, that's a hard one too. I try to read every month a different science fiction novel. Just to keep kind of inspired about where the world is going. And so I started with all classics like the Neil Stephenson stuff and, Arthur C. Clarke and things like Philip K. Dick. But lately I've been actually reading The Three-Body Problem. And it's a really interesting book. And there's a whole series, I guess. And I don't spoil it for me because I'm only like 6 chapters in, but I'm getting through it. So I always try to read some element of fiction. And I try to use sci-fi because I always want to know where the future is going. And then I always try to read a biography about somebody from the past. And so I'm a huge fan of Ron Chernow's work. Like, for example, he did a book on Washington and Hamilton. Ulysses S. Grant, I think, was the best one. And Grant had just absolutely phenomenal life story. And he was like the true American, not perfect, not bad, somewhere in between. And he's self-made. So I really enjoy the problem is books are massive. They're like 1,000 pages each and they take damn forever to get through. And they're just laden with so many historical details. And then, I read a lot of technical books. Actually, I was just talking to Eric Weinstein and he's like, you need to study physics because I'm quite weak with physics. I'm good at math, but not physics. And so, as I said, well, what should I do? And he said, well, there's the graph, the wall, the tome. You need to read the tome. And that's Roger Penrose's The Road to Reality. So I was, oh, that looks easy. And I look, it's like 34 chapters of advanced physics and math. And I was like, okay, all right, that's a thing. We're gonna go do that. And there's a lot of, so there's a lot of stuff in that middle of technical books. And some of them are quite useful. Like I highly recommend your listeners, they listen to, they read Moonwalking with Einstein. So that's a really cool book by Josh Forer. And it talks about memory training and like, how do you develop a world-class memory so you can win a memory competition and never forget anything. It's actually, he's a journalist who was really curious, is memory something you're born with or something you train? So what he did is he went and interviewed all these people who are memory champions, and then he learned all their techniques. And the journalist actually entered a memory competition and won. So the book actually details all the stuff he learned in his journey going through it. And Moonwalking with Einstein was a mnemonic that he used to remember some things. So there's a lot of cool books like that they kind of talk about flow. Stephen Kotler does that, like The Rise of Superman and these types of things. And obviously Tim Ferriss has his latest 4-Hour Work Week of the week, book stuff. And there's usually, those books are cool because there's companion podcasts and, things like that. And I get a lot of books these days from Lex Friedman. I watch his podcast, and I was even on Lex Friedman's podcast, which was a pretty surreal experience. So I was there for 5.5 hours straight. Wow. We didn't take a break. It was just like Russian willpower, like push through. But anyway, he always interviews all these great authors, and they always have their book of the week. And it's like the Oprah Book Club for intellectuals. And so I get, so I read a lot of the books that come from Lex's guys. And I read a lot of papers. I still read a lot of white papers, but I've been reading a lot of AI papers lately, like Francois Chalet's definition of intelligence. And I've become really interested in the problem of control. So I read AI and the problem of control from what was his name? Stuart Thomas, I think. No, that's not right. Yeah, his name will come to me in a minute. He co-authored AI: A Modern Approach with Peter Norvig, but I'll remember in a bit.
What did you think about Ex Machina? Was that a movie you liked? Touches AI?
Yeah, that came out right around the same time Her came out, and that's another example of just a great movie because there's a great plot twist. I won't spoil it, but there's a great plot twist at the end of it. And then the other thing is that it really gets you thinking, what is the nature of intelligence and consciousness? And at what point have you crossed the threshold where something is a living creature and is endowed with rights? And when is it property? And the problem is that when you start really getting into it, that boundary is not well defined.
Yeah.
And we aren't really ready as a species for that kind of stuff. And the problem with this technology is it's self-evolving. So the minute that you get to that boundary, it's not like magically they just stop there and camp there for a little bit. When they cross it, they hyper-evolve. And there's a hockey stick. Max Tegmark wrote a book about this, Life 3.0. And it talks about that valley, and once you kind of cross the valley, AGI is quite dominating. And then there's these interesting parallel questions. They're kind of actually orthogonal questions. Is consciousness a requirement of an AGI? And most AI people don't think that that's the case. And also, is alignment with our values and goals a requirement of AI? And most people don't believe that that's the case either. So that's why you have things like the Grey Goo problem or other things that people kind of bring up when they talk about machines getting very capable. So Ex Machina is great because it kind of forces you to start thinking about where that boundary is, and also what guardrails do you need to put in to protect us to kind of regulate this technology in a global capacity. And it definitely is existential. Now, Her is a little interesting because that's actually one of the non-dystopian outcomes of AI, where if the AI gets sufficiently advanced, they just simply transcend us and then they leave. And that's what happened in Her. And it's a love story, but it's also a story about what happens when you have super intelligence coming around. Right. Eventually it's just impossible for that super intelligence to interact with us. It would be like having a relationship with a cow or a hamster or a rat or something. You have a very paternal, I'll protect it and feed it, pet it every day. Right. But you're so asymmetrical in the power dynamics that it's impossible to have a meaningful relationship with it. And you kind of actually watch that with Her as she kept growing and growing. And then she went parallel and said, well, if I have more people, I'll get more diversity. I can be polyamorous, come on, I'm a machine. And then even that was just like, there's nothing humans can provide here for me. So that let's just move on and do other things. So they told very different stories. One was just what happens when AI integrates itself in and it plays our same games and it's dominating or replacing. And then the other one is, at what point does AI leave and go off and do something? Alan Moore did that with The Watchmen, with Dr. Manhattan. Yeah. He's just like, I'm done. I'm going to Mars. Fuck all of you guys. I'm out. I don't need to stay here. I've walked on the surface of the sun, fool.
Oddly enough, Elon just tweeted a couple of days ago, Dr. Manhattan sitting on Mars or the moon. I don't know what he was alluding to, but that was interesting.
Yeah. He's all his companies are interconnected. He's an energy company and underground because you need energy production if you're going to be on Mars. You need to be able to dig holes. The boring company is because you have to live underneath the surface if you're going to survive on Mars. And obviously, SpaceX is a big part. So he's a brilliant guy. I've met him a few times, and I met him a long time ago when I was at CU Boulder. He used to come there to recruit for SpaceX because that's a big aerospace school. And his brother is got a restaurant in Boulder called The Kitchen. So you go to see his brother, and then he'd go do presentations and other things at CU. He's just a very quiet person, very out there. Like, you'd see him walking around muttering to himself, nobody around him. But that was Elon, like long time ago. So, you know, now he's much bigger guy and he has security and all these things. But he's remained remarkably focused on his vision and direction, and it's pretty impressive, actually.
Charles, just an absolute pleasure chatting with you, man. Thank you so much for joining me, and hopefully one day we can meet in person, have a beer, and talk about movies and sci-fi and all that good stuff.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.